The flickering neon sign outside the diner barely cut through the thick fog rolling in from the harbor. It was past midnight when Daniel Mercer, a 35-year-old accountant, pushed open the door. The bell jingled as he stepped inside, the warmth instantly replacing the bone-chilling cold outside. He ordered his usual black coffee, no sugar, no cream, and slid into his favorite booth by the window. It was supposed to be just another late night, but tonight, something was different. The old man sitting at the counter turned his head slowly, his eyes locking onto Daniel. There was something unsettling about the way he stared. Then, as if making up his mind, he slid off the stool, limped toward Daniel's booth, and sat across from him. "You don't know me," the man said, voice raspy and deliberate. "But I know you. And you've been missing for 20 years." Daniel scoffed, shaking his head. "You must be mistaken. I've never been missing a day in my life." The man slid a tattered newspaper across the table. Daniel hesitated before picking it up. The front page was yellowed, the headline bold and impossible to ignore. "Missing. 10-year-old Daniel Mercer vanishes without a trace." His heart pounded. It had to be a joke. A cruel, absurd joke. But the grainy photo staring back at him, it was unmistakable. It was him. Or rather, a much younger version of him. "No," Daniel whispered, his hands trembling. "That's impossible. I grew up with my parents. I had a normal childhood." The old man's face darkened. "Did you? Or do you just remember it that way?" The next morning, Daniel couldn't shake the unease that had burrowed deep into his mind. He went through the motions of his routine, showering, dressing, heading to work, but everything felt off, like a distant memory replaying itself slightly out of sync. His phone rang. His mother. He hesitated before answering. "Hi, Mom." "Danny. How are you, sweetheart? You sound tired." "I'm fine," he lied. "Just had a weird night." "Oh?" "Some guy came up to me, said I was missing as a kid. Showed me an old newspaper article with my name on it." Silence. Too much silence. "Mom? That's ridiculous, honey. You were never missing. Don't let some stranger get inside your head." Her voice was even, careful. Too careful. "Yeah," Daniel muttered. "That's what I thought." But the seed of doubt had been planted, and it was already growing. Daniel dug through his childhood photos that night, or at least, the ones he had. There weren't many. Most were from his teenage years. Very few from before that. No baby pictures. No family albums. No hospital records. His fingers hovered over his keyboard before he typed into the search bar, "Missing children reports 20 years ago." He scrolled through the names, the faces, and then, there it was again. Daniel Mercer. Missing since age 10. Except there was something new. Something he hadn't seen before. Case closed. Presumed dead. His breath caught in his throat. How could he be dead? If he was right here. Daniel's hands hovered over the keyboard, his heart hammering. Presumed dead. The words repeated in his mind like a broken record. How could the world have thought he was gone when he had lived a perfectly normal life? Unless the life he remembered wasn't real. His pulse spiked as he scrolled further down the search results. There were more articles, but one in particular made his breath hitch. "Missing boy's parents never stopped searching." Daniel clicked the link. The article was dated just 5 years ago. His so-called parents had still been looking for him well into his adulthood. He skimmed the text, his eyes locking onto a name. Margaret and Henry Mercer, not the names of the people who raised him. Daniel's mind reeled. If those weren't his real parents, then who had raised him? His stomach twisted. He had to get answers. With shaking hands, Daniel dialed the only number he could think of. Mom? Danny, it's late. His mother's voice came through, groggy but alert. Is everything okay? No, nothing was okay. Mom, he said, forcing his voice to stay steady. What's my middle name? A pause. Daniel, why would you ask something like that? Just tell me, he pressed. Another pause, longer this time. It's Matthew. Daniel Matthew Mercer, she finally answered. Daniel closed his eyes. That was wrong. The article he had just read listed his full name. Daniel Christopher Mercer. His breath caught in his throat. His mother had hesitated because she didn't know the answer. Because she wasn't his real mother. His hands clenched into fists. Who are you? He demanded, his voice shaking. Danny, she said, suddenly urgent. Whatever you're looking into, stop. Right now. It's not safe. The line went dead. Daniel sat frozen, the silence in his apartment deafening. And then, a noise. A creak outside his door. His heart pounded as he stood slowly, creeping toward the peephole. The hallway was empty, but a shadow flickered in the dim light just out of view. Someone was there, watching. Daniel's mind raced. He was being followed. But why? What had he uncovered? Or worse, what had he forgotten? Daniel's breath hitched. He took a step back from the door, heart hammering in his chest. Whoever was out there wasn't just passing by. They were waiting, watching. A sudden scrape against the door made him flinch. And then, silence. Forcing himself to move, he grabbed a kitchen knife and inched toward the door. His fingers trembled as he turned the knob and pulled it open just enough to peek outside. The hallway was empty, but something had been slipped under his door. A single, folded piece of paper. Daniel bent down and picked it up, his fingers tightening around the edges as he unfolded it. His stomach lurched. Stop digging. You were never supposed to remember. His mouth went dry. His hands trembled as he reread the words, his mind racing with possibilities. Someone knew. Someone knew that he had started searching. Daniel shut the door and locked it, his breathing shallow. His head throbbed as flashes of something buried deep, began to surface. A dark room. A flickering light bulb. A woman's voice whispering, "Stay quiet, Danny. They're coming." Pain. A sharp, burning pain in his arm. His own screams echoing in his ears. Daniel gasped, gripping the edge of his kitchen counter. Where had that memory come from? It felt real, too real, and yet it wasn't part of the life he remembered. Who was that woman? Why had she been so afraid? His head swam with questions, but one thing was certain, his past was a lie. His phone buzzed, making him jump. Unknown number. He hesitated before answering. Hello? A low, distorted voice came through the line. You need to leave. Daniel's throat tightened. Who is this? A pause. Then, they know you're looking. And they'll make you disappear again. Daniel's grip tightened around the phone. Again. He swallowed hard. Who are they? The line went dead. And then, a new message flashed onto his screen. If you want answers, come to 481 Westbridge Avenue. Midnight. Alone. Daniel's pulse pounded. He was being watched. Followed. Controlled. But he couldn't stop now. He needed to know the truth. The night air was thick with tension as Daniel drove through the dimly lit streets. His fingers were tight around the wheel, his mind a storm of thoughts. What if this was a trap? What if he was walking straight into danger? Or, what if this was his only chance to finally understand who he really was? He turned onto Westbridge Avenue. The address led him to an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of town. The windows were boarded up, the air thick with the scent of damp concrete and rust. He killed the engine and stepped out, every nerve in his body screaming at him to turn around. But then, he saw her. A woman, standing in the shadows, waiting. And when she stepped into the light, Daniel felt the world tilt beneath his feet. Because he knew her. Somewhere, deep in his bones, he knew her. Her voice was a whisper, barely audible against the wind. "Danny, you finally found me." Daniel's breath caught in his throat as he stared at the woman standing before him. She looked to be in her late 40s, her dark hair streaked with gray, her eyes wide with a mix of relief and urgency. His mind scrambled to place her, to recall why the sight of her sent a jolt of recognition through his chest. "You know me," Daniel murmured, his voice barely above a whisper. She nodded slowly. "I do. And you know me, too. Somewhere inside, you remember." Daniel shook his head, frustration bubbling up. "I don't. I don't remember anything before I was 10. I grew up in a normal home, with normal parents. This doesn't make sense." Her expression darkened. "They made sure you wouldn't remember." His pulse spiked. "Who?" "The people who took you." Daniel took a step back, his mind reeling. "Took me? What are you talking about?" The woman exhaled sharply. "You disappeared 25 years ago, Danny. You were kidnapped. Your real parents never stopped looking for you, but the authorities gave up. And when they did, someone powerful, made sure you wouldn't remember." Daniel's head throbbed as flashes of a dimly lit room, the feeling of cold metal restraints, and a voice whispering, "Don't fight it," surfaced in his mind. He clutched his temples. "No, no, I grew up in a loving home. My parents—" "They aren't your parents, Danny," she interrupted, her voice firm. "They're your captors." His stomach twisted violently. "That's insane." She took a slow step toward him, her gaze locked onto his. "Then tell me, Danny, do you have any memories of your childhood before the age of 10? Silence. His blood ran cold. Daniel shook his head, his mind racing. "No. But that doesn't mean—" "It means exactly what you're afraid of," she cut in. "You were taken. And not just kidnapped, erased. They wiped your memories, implanted new ones. They turned you into someone else." Daniel swallowed hard, his heartbeat thundering in his ears. "If that were true, why let me go?" he demanded. She hesitated before answering. "Because they wanted to see if it worked. If they could take a child, break him, and rebuild him into something else entirely. You were a part of an experiment, Danny. And when they were convinced it had worked, they let you go. To live a normal life." His stomach twisted. "Who are they?" She glanced around as if she expected someone to be watching. Then, in a low voice, she said, "The Foundation." Daniel's body went rigid. The name sent a jolt of something through him. Fear. Recognition. Somewhere deep inside, he knew that name. But he had no idea why. The woman reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a small, leather-bound notebook. She handed it to him. "These are notes I took while looking for you," she said. "Everything I could find on the Foundation. Their experiments. Their reach. Your case." Daniel hesitated before flipping it open. Inside, he found a faded photograph. His breath caught. It was him, a younger version of himself. But not at 10 years old. He looked much younger, maybe 5. And standing next to him was her. His throat tightened. You were there." Tears welled in her eyes. "I was. I tried to stop them, but I failed. Daniel felt the world shift around him. He had spent his whole life believing he was someone he wasn't. And now, he had to find out who he really was. Because if the Foundation had let him go, what else had they done to him? Daniel stared at the photograph, his fingers tightening around the edges. The woman beside his younger self. She wasn't just familiar. There was something deeper, something pulling at the very foundation of his mind. His breath was shaky. Who? Who are you? The woman swallowed hard before answering. My name is Evelyn. Her voice trembled slightly. And before they took you, I was your sister. Daniel's vision blurred, his head suddenly light. Sister? The word felt foreign, yet right. It clashed with everything he thought he knew, but deep inside, something clicked into place. I don't have a sister, he muttered, but even as he said it, doubt clouded his voice. Evelyn smiled faintly, though sadness dulled the expression. That's what they wanted you to believe. They erased me from your life, just like they erased your parents, your home, your name. Daniel looked up sharply. My name? She hesitated before speaking again. Your real name isn't Daniel Mercer. His pulse pounded in his ears. You were born Elias Carter. The name hit him like a shockwave. He staggered back, gripping the side of a rusted metal crate. His body felt unsteady, like gravity itself had shifted. No, he whispered, shaking his head violently. That's not true. It is, Evelyn said firmly. You were only 5 when they took you. They made you into Daniel Mercer. They built your life from scratch. But before that, before all of this, you were Elias. You had a family. A real one. The air felt thick, suffocating. Images flickered in his mind, quick, disjointed. A small blue bicycle. A golden retriever. Laughter in the backyard. And then, darkness. Pain. Screaming. Daniel clutched his temples as a wave of dizziness slammed into him. He remembered, but the memories weren't clear, more like echoes of a distant dream. If Evelyn was telling the truth, then his whole life was a lie. A sharp click echoed in the distance. Evelyn's expression hardened. We need to go. Now. Daniel barely had time to react before she grabbed his wrist and pulled him deeper into the warehouse. Footsteps. Heavy. Fast. Coming toward them. Panic surged through him. Who? The Foundation, she hissed, ducking behind a stack of crates. They know you're waking up, and they won't let it happen. Daniel's heart pounded. His entire life, his identity, had been engineered. And now, whoever had built him was coming to collect their experiment. A voice cut through the silence. Daniel Mercer. It was deep, calm, controlled. Evelyn's grip on his arm tightened. They're here, she whispered. Daniel held his breath as a shadow loomed at the warehouse entrance. For the first time in his life, he wasn't sure if he existed at all. Daniel's heartbeat roared in his ears. He and Evelyn remained crouched behind the crates, the echo of footsteps growing louder. Whoever was after them wasn't in a rush. They were confident. The deep, steady voice called out again. Daniel Mercer, or should I say Elias Carter? His breath caught. They knew. A shadow moved past the crates. Evelyn tensed, gripping Daniel's wrist tighter. Enough hiding, the voice continued, calm, almost amused. We've spent years shaping you. You don't belong to the past. You belong to us. Daniel's mind raced. His entire life, his memories, his identity, had been crafted by the Foundation. And now, they had come to reclaim what they believed was theirs. He wouldn't let that happen. Evelyn met his gaze. We need to run. But Daniel's body felt different now. Stronger, more aware. The memories they had tried to bury weren't just surfacing, they were awakening. And with them, so was something else. A part of him they never wanted him to remember. The man stepped into view, dressed in a dark suit. He had the eerie composure of someone in control. He held up a syringe. "Come with me," he said smoothly. "No more questions. No more running. We can fix this." Daniel slowly rose to his feet, surprising Evelyn. The man smiled. "That's it. You remember now, don't you?" Daniel did. He remembered the cold, sterile rooms, the endless tests, the injections, the whispers behind the glass. He's different. He's an anomaly. They hadn't just erased his past. They had altered him. A shudder ran down his spine. He had survived something unnatural. He was never meant to leave. And if they took him back, he never would again. Daniel's gaze locked onto the man. "I remember everything," he said. His voice was steady, stronger than it had ever been. "And I'm done being your experiment." The man's face darkened. "You don't have a choice." Evelyn suddenly lunged, knocking over a stack of crates. The sound shattered the silence, and in that split second of distraction, Daniel moved. Instinctively, powerfully, faster than he should have been able to. He slammed into the man, knocking the syringe to the ground. Evelyn grabbed it and plunged it into the attacker's leg. His body stiffened. His eyes widened in shock. Daniel and Evelyn didn't wait. They ran, out of the warehouse, into the cold night air, into freedom. They didn't stop running until they reached the edge of town. The city lights flickered behind them. Evelyn panted, hands on her knees. "We did it." Daniel, chest rising and falling, stared at the horizon. For the first time in 25 years, he was free. But the truth haunted him. He had no idea what they had done to him. He had no idea who he really was. And worst of all, he had no idea if the Foundation would ever stop hunting him. But one thing was certain. They had created him. But they would never control him again.